I would be very cautious about doing this. I mean, the worst thing I'd hate to have is a reputation of someone who does this irresponsibly, because usually they think, this is it's driven by the ego of the non-exec who wants to show how smart they are.
Ah.
Therefore, they stimulate conflict to show how smart they are and kind of satisfy their ego because they're smarter than the executives, and that is never a good assumption to make.
That's a really good point that, we talked about one side of the executives, but then, the non executive director who wants to show off and wants to
Yes.
show everybody their business prowess. And that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And it sort of reminds me of something, in my work that I do when I'm, meeting resistance or hostility. Sometimes I might ask someone to just kind of close their eyes and ask themselves, what are they attached to right now?
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that
No,
resonate for you?
yeah. No, 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 you're absolutely right. I mean, and part of it comes back to, and I was doing a thing about this last Wednesday and Thursday on a program I run, is, as a director in theory, not theory legally, you should act in the best interests of the company, but there is always the temptation to act in the best interests of winning the argument and being right, which is a nice personal, satisfaction thing. Um, and I had some very interesting debates about this with people on Wednesday, actually over 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you know, one guy said, "Look, everybody likes to be right," and he wasn't wrong; he was correct. And sometimes, certainly, I've been in a situation where I've had to ask myself, am I pursuing this line of argument with executives because I think it's the right thing for the company, or am I pursuing it because I want to beat these guys? I want to win the argument and prove that I'm right. It shouldn't be the latter, Maria. I mean, and that kind of gets me back to my kind of basic principle about, and maybe it's an interesting benchmark, is is pursuing the temptation to create conflict the best interest of the company at this moment in time at the board level? Will it add value? Will it move things forward? Will it address some issues? Will it solve some problems? Or is it just me showing that I think I'm smart?
It's really interesting, and I can take you back to the example you gave of the gentleman who didn't like the word crisis, and you could have just pursued him and said, well, you need to get into a reality, and it could be a
Yeah,
crisis.
yeah, yeah,
But what you did was you realise that that's just a trigger word for him, and there's sort of
yeah,
another way to have that conversation that's not going to generate that kind of extreme kind of reaction.
yeah. But never used it again. Found a different way of doing it because it was dysfunctional to have him screaming his head off from the stuck to the ceiling. That was not going to, and he was group chair and CEO of a reasonable sized business.
Mm.
So having him in that emotional, volatile state, served no purpose whatsoever. And I kind of got him back down, took a little bit of time, rebuilt the relationship, never used it again. He never referred to it again, which was interesting. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, did it help move a relationship? And it was kind of it was literally like a kind of one of those things you see when there's been an earthquake and you see the graph where the earthquake happens and things are stable, then it goes root,
Mm.
then it comes back down again, and then it kind of carries on. And it was a bit like that.
You could only be saying these things out of years of wisdom and experience and having been around the block a few
Yeah.
times. But, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I've always said that the one thing that should not happen in a board meeting is nobody should be put into shock, because all the
Yes.
conversations and all the preparation and all the canvassing and the, as you say, gathering of information should have been done well before the meeting. It
Yeah.
isn't a place to ambush anybody.
No, I mean the only kind of people I find that ambush are the ego-driven people who are kind of in it for self-aggrandizement of their own ego, and yeah, and in fact, it's for their own personal benefit. They want to make themselves look good in their own eyes. Nobody else gives a damn, how they look is my kind of view. But there are some have an ego and almost feel the need to kind of promote this. Yeah, and it's part of it is you're lucky to have me on this board because I am so wonderful. I don't have a lot of time for people like that. I've kind of I used to be in my kind of earlier days in this, and I'm not particularly proud of it, but I used to sadly resort to sarcasm in their direction quite often, and I realised that was not constructive. So I try not to do it now. Well, I say no, not try. I'm pretty sure I haven't done it for a long time. So I always aim to be. I think one of the kind of the watchwords in this, Marie, is if you can be constructive, the chances of you having a relationship to develop beyond a conflict situation are much higher than if you're sarcastic, negative, ego driven, winning the argument oriented. If you can, it doesn't work all the time, it doesn't work every time, but if you can at least try to be constructive and non-personal, I think you leave the ground fertile for the next board meeting and the time after that. Okay. And I think that's what you have to do because otherwise you end up with, a split board, a dysfunctional board.